Thank you very much, Tina. I'm having such a good time here. And as you've heard, I kind of live all over. And I began fantasizing as soon as I arrived. Oh, maybe I could live here too. But I've enjoyed myself in the past couple of days, and I'm so impressed with what you've done here in your museums and your spaces. And I've yet to see it all in detail, but I'm trying very hard to do so, and I know I'll have to come back. I'm going to show at Storm King in the spring some fountains. That's what I'm doing now, fountains, ceramics, and paperwork. And somehow I'm able to kind of continue doing them all at the same time, but categorically in different spaces. So I believe that that's probably why I have so many nests around the world. It allows me to bring in information and ideas. So I'll begin with this one work, which is a wax painting. I went to Zofinucum in New Orleans. I studied sculpture through ceramics, and also painting. My major was painting. And before I'd gone to Newcomb, I took a logic course with a person called Jason Xenakis, who was the brother of the Xenakis, who is a famous musician and architect that worked with Corbusier. Later, when I heard about Corbusier coming out of Louisiana, I really didn't know who he was when my logician, philosopher teacher, told me about him, that his brother was working with him. But later I happened to meet my partner that has since passed away a year and a half ago. His mother commissioned Corbusier to build the first home in India, in Ahmedabad, India. It's called the Sarabhai House. So when I go to India, I live on that compound. And they have a large fabric museum on the same compound. They were mill owners who collected beautiful works of various fabrics through history. It's probably the largest fabric museum in the East. And they're from a Jain family, so they have a lot of early Jain manuscript paintings also in the comparative exhibition, where you actually can compare the 4 centuries of Jain paintings as you walk along and see them displayed. They also have in their museum there 2 fantastic Chola bronzes of the dancing figures, which are probably 2 of the four major ones in the world of the 10th century. So I am very challenged by going there and working there, and I've gotten to know a lot of the contemporary Indian artists. I came to New York from Newcomb College after I graduated, and right away I met Barnett Newman, and I was very challenged by meeting someone so arrived. He was already in his early 60s. He died at the age of 65, very early. But he and Annalie would stay up most of the night, and Barney liked to jitterbug. And I also liked to jitterbug with Barney. So he went to the art parties, and at that time the art parties seemed to be very small. I met Warhol, I met Frank Stella, I met a Scotsman that was at the Brooklyn Museum, where I was getting a kind of postgraduate contact with artists, and met even more and more artists through that connection. A Scotsman who had studied with Bridget Riley, who was a famous Irish artist that was living in London, now lives in France. So I got to know the whole art world, which seems pretty small at the time. I mean, it's huge now. And I was very lucky to meet Henry Goetz-Soller, and who later didn't live long enough, but had been at the Met. He had just begun to be a director there of contemporary. So I felt, even before I was 30, I was exhibiting at the Paula Cooper Gallery and at the Whitney, and I was connected to the ideas immediately because of my education with this philosopher teacher in my hometown, Lake Charles, Louisiana. So I've been very lucky in my movements and in my associations, and have enjoyed every bit of it and taken advantage of the ideas and the energy that I encountered. I moved to California and then began to yo-yo back and forth in the 70s. And I never really gave up California until I discovered New Mexico 20 years ago. So I still go back and forth to New Mexico and have built Adobe studios out there that are my base now for a lot of the sculpture. So I've made and worked out in Long Island works. I've taught at University of Rochester, and I've taught in Quinnipiac. They, as you probably know, do very involved with politics, and somehow I think the director of the art or the humanities there met me in New Orleans in a panel, saw me on a panel and decided to invite me there. They were going to build their art department, but basically they're a business school, and I had some of my best students at the University of Rochester who were scientists, and my best students even in Quinnipiac. So I like teaching media courses. I taught media, video, and art courses, and I sort of like to introduce just a general realm of the context of different kinds of working. So with different media, and that's how I've developed my ideas. Today I'm primarily interested in still experimenting with now paper, making my own paper, and paper sculpture and painting it, and also doing fountains, and as I mentioned, ceramics. I have a show coming up, as Tina mentioned, in London, and I mentioned a show in New York of the fountains in May, and London in January. So this is the beginning of, after I met Barnett Newman, I was interested in the idea of so-called minimal artists and what they were doing. And what I didn't like about it was seeing the canvas. And I didn't, somehow, aesthetically, I thought that the situation with the canvas was kind of ugly. And so I decided also, I thought that paint was all about skin and illusion and space, painting. And I still feel that interesting painting for me has to do with the quality of the paint and the surface. And I also feel that about sculpture, the form, and how the form works gesturally with the different materials. So I'm very involved with surface and drawing in the sculpture. And in the paintings, it's the same, the surface and the pull of the skin over the whatever surface it is. So this is wax. I began to make my own encaustic paint and studied the recipes and began to do this kind of frame. This is the only one that survives. I did several, and then I rounded the top and the bottom and did it as high, my height, and then as, say, as wide as I was then, which was less wide than I am now. And also did some holes in the surface and watched the wax dripping in. So I continued to do wax paintings. And there you can see some holes there. And I continued to curve them and then made them smaller. And then marbleized them, and actually I think Saul LeWitt had this one and gave it to Hartford. But I considered this, I did 2 of those, and I considered them transitions, because they were telling me to do something else with the wax other than fire burning, the marbleized effect. It didn't make the format seem as logical, but the format was logical. I could describe the depth of the surface. And so I began to do 2 brushstroke paintings. And I continued on the brushstrokes after also starting to pour latex rubber, not wax, on the floor. So I began to build up the brushstrokes, and they looked very organic, a little like as pine cones do, or ripples in the sand or mud when water passes. And they began to be thicker and thicker. The Metropolitan Museum has one of these that I did quite recently. My home burned down in 2001, and I had phosphorescence underneath, and it was a thick painting. And the format was still good. My sister brought it to me after losing her mate, his child, and their friend. And so I decided to do a painting which I worked on for a number of years, about 10 years, and it was called Tress Burn. They died in the fire. And the Metropolitan happened to buy it and then asked me what was the meaning of that. But it was the last painting that I did as that, because I felt compelled to kind of do it. After I was doing the marbleized pieces of wax on the floor, I did the first one called Odalesque, or Hey Hey Frankenthaler. I liked the idea of Pollock and the poured paintings of Frankenthaler spatially, and Morris Louis. I saw a large show of theirs in Baltimore at the museum, their first probably show. It was an important showing in the 60s. I think it was around 65 or 64, maybe 63. So these poured paintings were done in 66. I had the idea in 65, and the wax paintings were done in the early 60s. And this is owned, I think, by Buffalo, or the Albright Knox, rather. That was a larger one that I'd done, and I started pouring on wax linoleum. And I did something, David Bourdon was writing for, a critic was writing for the Life magazine, and I had an invitation from Rhode Island to do a poured piece there. So I would do these works in situ for the small honorarium, and also they paid for the pigments or the latex rubber. The rubber is a natural rubber, and you have a wonderful first example of one of my first exhibition pieces, and I'll tell you the story about that here. So that was the first Odalesque. This one was called Fallen Painting. That's the painting that you saw. The photographs were made by Henry Brzezinski of Life magazine. And I'll move it over here. let's just check it. Okay, so these photographs were made by Henry Grozinski of Life magazine, and were done in Rhode Island. I was 27 at the time. This made quite a difference, and after this, I was offered a job at Rochester to do and I worked there for 2.5 years and commuted back and forth. So it allowed me to buy and experiment more with the polyurethane foam, which I was doing. So this is the piece, the way it ended up. The corner was not quite even. It was not a quite even 90-degree angle. Marcia Tucker and Jim Monty were organizing a very important show called Anti-Illusion and Process. I didn't know the name of the show, but I had understood that that I was involved with illusion and they weren't in the show. And by the time I was ready to do a piece in situ, I told Marcia that I would do 2 large pieces, and I ordered all the rubber that I could to do the 2 pieces, one in David Dio, a painter's studio, Chinese painter studio, and the other in Klaus Curtis's storage for the Bykirk Gallery. I did 2 huge paintings. This was called Contraband, after Contraband Bayou, near where I grew up and where I used to water ski in the lake and in the bayou. And you had all this marbleized effect from the oil refineries that sort of, were around from the motorboats. You'd have this kind of marbleized effect. So there was a kind of rule in the art world then about the figure ground. It was okay to do something that didn't have figure ground. And what's so great about this painting here is both Saul Lewitt and Dan Flavin commented when I did the painting. This again was slightly marbleized, but it's called Planet. This is when we were out in space, so these were done at that year when we were in space, and there's your bounce. And it was the first painting that I actually showed in situ. I withdrew from the Whitney Museum because the artist complained about my painting detracting, once I had enrolled it, detracting from Richard Serra's lead piece in the corner. It wasn't very large. Of course, my painting had been much larger than the Serra painting, which Marcia could have chosen either this one or that one. That's a close-up of the marbleization of Contraband, or that one. So, and Ryman were on one wall, and so I was put in the same room. And then I said, well, I can always do something in situ, but they would not allow me to do that. So then I showed this piece at the Bykirk Gallery, and Chuck Close was introduced, and I was introduced into the art world in the same room. Chuck Close had a portrait painting, and I did this in situ. So I looked at the painting 2 days ago, and you can see that they're crossboards I had not seen of the back of the room structurally. You can see underneath it, you can see what the room kind of, that was the context of the room. It was on 81st Street across from a funeral home where Judy Garland was celebrated. So then later I experimented, actually at the same time as I did one of the latex paintings. All of them are placed in museums today. I didn't do that many. You're seeing them all. And this particular one I did at the same time as one of the larger ones. I wanted to do a caterpillar-like one. I wanted to see if I could rumple it. What I was trying to do is build up, and I hadn't found the material. So, and I also wanted to do one with the leftovers that was very marbleized, and created this piece called Blatt. And I was slowly building up with a semi-flexible polyurethane foam, M.P. Madwick, who was a big rubber consultant during World War II and invented the actually had patents finally on the polyurethane used for sculpture, the frozen polyurethane for picture frames and so forth like that. And he would make my material for me. I would fly it over to Germany, and I did exhibitions in Dusseldorf at the time. And also, so I'm known in Europe. I was known in Europe very early. And these are pieces that Australia owns. Australia invited me, the National Gallery in Australia, and they bought more recently one of the semi-flexible foam pieces. Some of them glowed in the dark. And this one in particular, I made a mold and cast it in different metals, bronze and aluminum. And the Museum of Modern Art owns that form. This one I've cast in lead. This one, I remember Greenberg walked this, I showed it to the Paula Cooper Gallery. I had a yellow one you could see in the corner. He walked up, and it did everything that he said to do, but he couldn't turn it upside down and decide that it was better the other way. That's what he used to do with the painters that did the stain paintings. And this one was done for Janie and Clint Murchison in Dallas. He was backer of the Cowboys. And he wanted me to do, as a project for him, a tunnel for his train that he could go around in. I thought it was a good idea, but it wasn't something I wanted to do, so I didn't do it. But an armadillo bit it, and Janie Murchison, his wife, was very upset with me. I think they probably threw it out, which they shouldn't have done, of course, and the Dallas Museum still has theirs, and there it is. I've shown it all over the world, actually. This was called for Carl Andre at the time in the Jewish Museum that Vera Liss was backing. And I did a piece for Vera too. Had a brick piece that was called Lever and it was shown at the Jewish Museum. And it impressed me, so I thought that I really wanted to use architecture, and that's when I began to cast into corners and away from the wall. And in Germany, I started doing the wings because it was a floating wall, and I used the space below. This was the first showing at the Paula Cooper Gallery of the cast pieces I got to Guggenheim. And this is probably one of the survey shows. I did a small piece of the very first foam piece in bronze called Come. I was working also in Canada and California. And in California, I continued to do some sparkle knots and sparkle pieces. This is me. This piece is aluminum casting. You saw the original foam. This is the piece called Quartered Meteor, which is cast in lead. This is the wing. This is the first showing of some of the works there. I wanted to call attention to the idea of nature with real plants and plastic plants. And I started doing torso pieces and something that looked rather surreal, something out of maybe Picasso when he was on the beach toward the end of his life, the kind of flag heads and surreal figures. I did it in a sort of a snail-like piece. These are flounces in the back. There's a pink piece that you can see. They were called lagnaps. I did a flounce with them. What I was doing was sort of making these prop pieces. I might have put the columns together with the foam pieces, but I decided to I was thinking about the idea of what's real and what's natural. And I began to continue with the foam pieces in situ. This was the first piece done at Vassar. Lynda was there then, and I allowed the piece to kind of get up off the floor at that time. And the first piece that I did in Kansas, I was interested in the phosphorescence. I had vapor lighting on and off, and they glowed in the dark. So I'm still interested in the idea of phosphorescence, and I'm working on a phosphorescent piece now called Hills and Clouds, and I'm transposing it into a kind of polyurethane clear plastic. This is a phosphorescent piece of the same color, but the photograph quality itself doesn't show that. Done in the Midwest. And the timer, the lights are going off, and what was interesting about the quality of the piece, you see the bright light is going off at the top, so the piece was rising and falling at the same time because of what you know about gravity and the shadows of the pores. It was a terrific illusion of falling and rising. So this is how I made them. With chicken wire 1x2s, I used the 1x2s to stir the polyurethane, which was in 5-gallon buckets. And then I poured from the 5-gallon bucket. The 2 urethanes was a 1-to-1 system, 6-pound density polyurethane. Again, I got it from MP Medwick, who made it in Queens. And I would order it and go around the world. He sent it to me in Minneapolis for the Walker. This is done at the Walker Museum. It was the opening of the new Walker Museum. Martin Friedman was there at the time. And this is the pieces that themselves. I found I could extend them 17.5 feet out in terms of scale. They didn't work in terms of drawing or scale any larger than that. MIT, this was in the Hayden Gallery, which was like a big fishbowl at the corner. And architects had not seen foam do that job of 17.5-foot cantilever just on sheetrock. And I found that I did do a stick just to adhere further here. I'd do 1x2 against the sheetrock wall, going horizontally. As I began to do more and more of them, I thought, well, it's just a good idea on the last couple of installations I did to do that. But it adhered to the paper of sheetrock anyway. This is I think a document of the show, which was a survey show at New Museum. I did the sparkle pieces, the sparkle knots after, and just after I stopped doing the installations, I went back to my studio and did some totem pieces without sparkles, just with rubbed-in pigment and cloth bunting. It was kind of a bunting theatrical gauze. You can see it was kind of pinkish. And I tied them in simple knots. I did a whole alphabet, a Greek alphabet, and did the sparkle pieces. The wreaths often in Europe sometime are put in front of a home at Easter or at death, just different kinds of memoriams done. And I was interested in that. I was also interested at Christmas time. I brought the Christmas lights to the clock tower and showed all the knots, all the sparkle pieces, and lit up the whole tower. You could see it from both the East and West Highway. The clock tower was one of the first spaces, other than museums, that started. Lena Heiss began it. And the next space, I think, was Portland, and I showed after that. It was one of the next city spaces. So there began to be these pop-up spaces that were supported, as you have here, through through either cities or the state. So that's a close-up of the sparkle knot. I was interested in the planes, the idea of cubism, but also the idea that was a kind of organic cubism. So it was a painting and the sculpture. So this is one of the last knots. I had used gold leafing. And I began to make them loose, tight, and then I began to metallize them. Sprayed metal over the cloth, because when I went to Portland and had my big sparkle knot show, I met a fellow that was started the Portland Art Center. His wife was the director. Actually, she was the mayor of Portland. And he was metallizing boards with metal, and I said, oh, I could metallize, they metallized baby shoes. I remember that as a kid. So I thought, well, I could metallize the cloth. And so what I did was start painting a metal, sculpt metal, as Jasper Johns used, over the sparkle knot pieces, and then started making new pieces. And this one was bought by Jeff Byers, who had backed the Bykirk Gallery, who was William Paley's son-in-law, and he gave it to the Museum of Modern Art, this one called Oscar. So I did the alphabet. So I did different ones. So I did a whole alphabet. This was a sparkle piece. This is called Yankee, Y for Yankee. This was a sparkle piece. And I did copper pieces called 7x11, showed them in New Orleans. This was Sace. This is the ad that I did in Art Forum. I had done a pinup before, and somebody said, who did that to her? And I thought, well, that didn't mock the sexes as much as it wasn't clear. So I thought, no one would argue that I did this to myself. So, in other words, I was interested in mocking the idea in such a way that it was a humanist gesture, the hermaphrodite image, and then the critics thought I was just trying to get attention. So I decided to gangbang them, each one with a casting of different metals. So there were 5 critics, and I used the different metals to cast the dildo, and I called it Smile. So I did some smiles. And then after that, I started doing these torsos with stretched cotton over chicken wire. I'm kind of back to this now, making paper stretched over different wires. And these, I was very interested in the torsos of the East, of Cambodian torsos that you often didn't see the head, you just saw the torso and the cloth, and the body of the cloth in early archaic Greek and sculptures, marble. And so this was kind of a period where I was interested in a classical form. Interested in light, the caryatids. This is part of the caryatids from the Acropolis series. And then later in India, I decided to do a piece that is very ambiguous. You don't know whether it's a back or a front. And so I did it there in stainless steel casting. Again, it's the torso size. And I did different knots. I wanted to do different folded knots earlier. So this is Chamichita U. I was using, that means bat in Gujarat. And word for a bat, not a bat, baseball bat, but a bat, the mammal flying. And I continued to do metallized pieces and experiment with both the copper and the aluminum in the same piece. And I was thinking of fabric, but then when I began to kind of think about larger forms in the metallizing, I began to think about them not being a decorative knot, but being, from the beginning anyway, I began to think of them as holding some kind of animus in their breathing forms, as if they were almost accordions breathing the air and alive. And so they were kind of breathing back and looking back at you. This is called Oscar. Again, I did the metallized alphabet. And I did away with the fleshiness of the plaster, and they were just the wire and the metal, metallizing. So they kind of hovered, they hugged each other. And a lot of that had to do with, I think, I began to have a series of dogs, which I still am very attached to. And a lot of it had to do with having animals around me. So I've had a whole team of dogs for the last 25 years or so. And so they began to interrelate in a way in the pieces themselves. So I thought of them as being physical personalities. And gestural at the same time. So it's a subject. And this is turmeric. I did a few pieces called jacks, in which you could throw them or relate to them in such a way you could do what you wanted with them. And this was a cactus that they make fences out of in India. And I cast those, and they have thorns, so they are really inexpensive fences because they're your phobia that you wouldn't want to cross. They just plant them there, and they are very thick. So they keep the animals in, and they keep people out too. This is a piece I did of carved brick pieces in India, a snake, and it was so significant they began to worship it because they have a snake goddess. So the tree was dying anyway, so the person whose grounds it was, my partner, their grounds, he said, well, you could do your snake around that tree. That's what I wanted to do, but he chose the tree. So this tree began to die because it was dying anyway. So then when it died, it fell over on the snake, and I had to repair it. So I decided to make these wrappings where it crawled away to these young trees. And there the lady is. She draws on the tree and puts flowers there. And this, of course, is another one that I did was kind of elephant-like. When I was very little, I could draw a perfect elephant. You know, when you're 3 or 4, you think you can do whatever you think you can do. And later, I decided, okay, I was going to do an elephant-type piece. At the one end, at the left end, it's a vase. It's very narrow, vase-like, and had buttresses. I forgot to show you. The buttresses are behind me there to support that. And there's another curve of an elephant actually looking. But I didn't call it elephant. It's just how do I make a gesture of architecture in architecture with carved brick? It was a trapezoid wall. Another period of transition where I started drawing with foam, sculpture in a sphere. I cast the first casting in aluminum, in crystals, same mold. Crystal, again, same mold. Different materials, bronze and patinaed it black. Different pieces. I drew the texture. somehow I got involved with Chinese, the detail in Chinese sculpture. So I think I had the idea, they weren't quite that detailed, but I kind of started thinking about Chinese and did all these textured pieces. I was also, when I was doing knots, I wanted to see if glass could be tied into a knot, so I tied it with my hands because they have these space-age gloves. So in Australia, I went there, and they have a very fine glass, in New Zealand, rather. And I put a lot of copper in there, and it was very fern-like and changed different colors. Green, you get the different greens because of the copper, or you get reds because of the copper, or sometimes you can put gold in the glass and it turns it red. So I was very involved with the different colors. And I wanted to see if clay could be tied into knots. So I did that with a lot of clay work. So I experimented with different, in this particular glaze, I was building in the glaze. I call this kind of a penguin color, but I got cow manure and put it in the glaze, this slip, and had this great tar baby kind of dripping thing. And I want to see what kind of, I studied with Robertson at Newcomb College, Tulane University, Olmec and Toltec art. And so I had the feeling of what I wanted in the knots and called these after that culture. This is called, let's see, Aztec anagama, which is a smoke. It's a stoneware smoked in ceramic. And I built in New Zealand, I went and had a one-person show at the museum in Auckland and built 60 at Montakawa. There was a fellow that made huge pipes, drainage pipes, so I took those pipes and built huge pieces and painted on them, slip glazes, and showed them there. So, and put them on sand, black sand. So I had a good time with those and did everything I could to them, tore them, ripped them, glazed them, with the slip. Didn't make them beautiful, it wasn't about painting, it was about sculpture and about a slip-on gestures on with the clay. So it was about painting and sculpture at the same time. I continued to work with the sculptural aspects of the clay and pushing it around. I tend to work categorically and try to push the material as far as I can go. This is clay pieces done on a background, slammed onto the background. I made a wire situation, build up the wire, and slam the piece on, and then make a mold, and then cast it in gold. Cast it in bronze, rather, and then gold leafed it myself. So, called nugget. This is the same type of piece that stands up, and it's what you see of the bronze is the underside and the top side, so it's very ambiguous as you're looking at it, particularly in the photograph. But what you're looking at is the underside, where the underside that you see is the bronze, but they're sort of waves, so it's called torso wave. So it's both a painting, as you see, and a sculpture. It's much like the waves that were out of what I wanted to do. I'd done a World's Fair piece. I won a World's Fair contest in the 80s for the 85 World's Fair. So I wanted to do some more clay pieces in the big size where I wouldn't have to just fire them, where I could actually cast them. So this is at Jack Larson Estate there. And I did a piece that was also like a bird. It has 6. And the Ohio Museum of Glass owns one of those, and the other one is at Jack Larson's on loan. Those two are, and they are a nice pair. Those done, as you can see, pieces. So I built the form and then slammed bits of clay from the block of clay and made the form and made it attached. So I was making a form out of the skin and I've always been interested in making forms out of the skin. So you have what appears to be a full sculptural form, but is a illusion. These are some silver cast pieces, totally silver, like skulls. You can arrange them in any way. One person has them all arranged in an entrance apartment in New York. These are lanterns that I made after I was interested in the idea of atomic explosions. But I showed them with a tray of flowers, and I think this was shown in Spain somewhere. And this is a big latex painting, 40 feet long, one of the contraband pieces. These are other pieces that I designed and made. First of all, I had the idea of making these forms and stacking them. So that's what basically they are. So that they begin to be like pillars, in a classical Indian building, but they're kind of pushed. I might do these in stone. This is a show at the new museum. These are stainless steel pieces that I made with clay. They're bars, These are also stainless steel pieces that are meant to be kept together. Totems. I don't really wish to enlarge them at this point because they're all about light and reflection. When you go there, they kind of disappear. When you see them, they're very physical. But I make them with clay and then transpose them. Singular piece. And there again, you have a torso and silver, all silver. They're called kingpins. And this is in black. I thought of how we map, how we see trees, phenomena, clouds, how we transpose what we see into figures. I did 7 or more figures like this. I showed them. I got a FABE grant to do the, in Bombay, where people go to get the consulate building, American consulate building in Bombay. I did the environment of 3 of these major pieces. These are documented in my retrospective survey show in California. So you see the torso in the middle, and with just more flounce. I think of them as sort of mapping countries and the oceans around them. I think of them as skeleton things. I think of them as what you see when you're in the sky, looking down on a plane. This is how I draw them, and then on chicken wire. And this is some of the beginning ones, which I actually sprayed with this foam. I sprayed the foam with this kind of flocking thing. So they're like Valentine, the flocking, but it's a gray silver. I experiment a rubberized coating. This is a silver one before it's polished. I saw it recently polished at the Gerald Peters Gallery in Santa Fe, and it was fantastic. I don't know if they documented it, but it was really a huge, it's about 9 feet wide. It's a beautiful piece. And I did some polyurethane translucent pieces, eggs in orange, eggs in phosphorus, eggs in blue phosphorus. That glows beautifully. It's a little, circles in black. I earlier experimented with glass and did a lot of glass and Czech, and did chandelier, and did glass in the Glass Museum in Portland, not Portland, Seattle, Tacoma, yeah. And I did this mask. They were African masks. I made molds of the 20s type African mask, and then took off from the face. and you can kind of see the mask, the nose and the eyes, you get long nose. And we blue them, and sometimes they, the form disappears. I've used this when I went with my grandmother to Greece, since she wanted to take me there. She was my godmother, and she's Greek. She was born on an island in Castellorzo in the Dodekanessos, the 12 islands. It was the 13th island closest to Turkey, and today this whole area is, as you know, a very dynamic political area, and it's always been a political area. Was owned by the Spanish, the Greeks, the Crusaders. Rhodes is the same way. It was the capital of the Dodekanessos, but Castellorzo is the 13th island. And so I went there, and I always wanted to go back. But in Athens, when we arrived, my uncle, who was much older than I, maybe 20 years or so, was drafted. And I grew up seeing him in this costume because he was drafted. My grandmother had to go over there to get him out of the army. And she took her grandson a couple of times, and then she took me finally, and it was in '53, so I couldn't fit in the girl's costume because it was for an older young woman, and so, but I fit perfectly in the boys, and I was so proud of myself, you see, fitting in a costume. And I've always liked costumes and Halloween, so this is my favorite time of year. And and so there I'm kind of donning myself up with the Porsche, and I'm playing James Dean because I love James Dean. And here I did a kissing scene, which, with the ambiguity and also the humanism of the idea of, sexual positioning is not as important as the human element and love. And also, all things being equal, I was tired of riding the wave of feminism and being, counted as one of the whatever. And so I decided to make a movie, which was a video about the amazing Bow Wow that happens to be a hermaphrodite but could sing and dance. So the artist is really of either sex or all sexes, and is judged. So my idea would be freedom of speech and sexuality, and so it's a sad little video. If you haven't seen it, it's going to be here. Some of you did see it, and I acted in it. I wrote the story with Stanton Kay. It was my idea to do because, I got a lot of whipping after I did the dildo piece. And so I decided to once and for all just make a statement about that. And I did, and then forgot about it. Other people, Cindy Sherman went on and did her acting with her photographs. She saw my acting in the Bow Wow, and I think it gave her an idea to do her poses. And there I am. I'm announcing my dog act. And I don't know why this is there, but the poor, and then these are going on. So I went on to do a lot of ceramics that are out there in the last year. I had great success with my ceramic show in New York, and it went to London at the Thomas Dane Gallery there. And I got brighter in color and interested in the torso again. You see it could almost be figurative. And here, this is the World's Fair piece. I did the World's Fair piece in the 80s, so there you have the feeling of the big wave, the wave that is a cantilever. And I envisioned it, and when I did it, I knew that was exactly what I wanted. So there's a kind of nice umbrella of even water falling down and some going in the back. And when there was the big storm, I thought it might have disappeared. It was stolen from the World's Fair, and there was a big hoopla about it recently when I just happened to go back. The city of Kenner was given it. It's a suburb, basically, of New Orleans, and they own the airport. I think they want it someday to put it at the New Orleans airport, but right now, I got it back. I got a very smart lawyer that pleased everybody. I didn't really want to reclaim it because I'd already borrowed it when they showed it in Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo wanted to buy it, and it was shown in their big square where the casinos were. And New Orleans has always wanted the casinos, but they didn't get it. And so this fountain has just been stored in an awful way. So I decided I would fix it in exchange for making a mold of it. And I did, and I'm going to change it because I don't like to make the same thing over and over. So everything I do usually is an individual thing. So there it is. I thought it was beautiful work at the time. It was a major piece, but no one knew about it. So that's why I wanted to get it back, make the mold, and then pour over it and do something differently. And that's what I'm doing with the other pieces that I've done. It's very Baroque. That's at the World's Fair in New Orleans. This is a document. And this is it in Monte Carlo. And I noticed that they had some stones around it. So I saw that there was a missing piece, and they're wanting to get it out. And so this, I did an individual one that I showed at the museum in Miami, one of the fairs. I cast it in '88, but I showed it maybe, I don't know, about 5-6 years ago, maybe more actually. And then I decided when I saw this place in Dublin, when I was asked to do a retrospective in Dublin at the museum there, I decided to take that fountain when I saw this big circle and make 3 more. And because I love that's the oldest house in Dublin. And I thought, I'll make 3 more. And they like it so much that they kept it there. And so there it is. Yeah. I don't know, this is a little world. I'm not the performer. The water is the performer. The fountain is an object. I don't think of it as a theatrical event. It's something more permanent in the mind. It's a configuration that is prehistoric in a sense, that plays on our unconscious, that can be interpreted in any way. But I'm really involved with icons. Icons that can be kind of conceived and brought into the mind and meditated and contemplated. We need situations of repose that invite us into ourselves and meditation, and we need something that reminds us of our very early experiences. So that, I put it up during Guy Fawkes Day, and and some kids were riding by on a bicycle, and I started chasing them out, and I was just teasing them, but they were very curious, they kind of got all excited. And so I really like the idea of people reading into things like that, and it's just perfect that I'm here today because this is my favorite time of year. And I always think of, goblins, gothic kind of monsters and fun houses and with the phosphorescent. So I'll keep on going. Let's see, we go to the next one.
Okay, so that's in Dijon. I did another fountain, different kind of fountain called Mother and Child, and it's very rococo and very delicate, very different from the World's Fair piece, and very different from the Goblin piece. It's very, very delicate and kind of, it skips over the water, very rococo. I could even imagine that in gold leaf. But it was so it's sort of sparkles, a very fine sparkling piece. The Museum of Modern Art owns the second casting of that, and the first casting is in Dijon. These are my atomic explosions. These were small pieces that I did that recycle the water with a little pump inside them. I put them only on concrete so that, some people don't get their floor, wet. But they don't have to be on concrete. It does lift them out, if you wanted to float them in the garden. There they are. There were names like Summer Dreams. And they just trickle. I saw a moss thing and I wanted these to collect moss. I like the idea of them being mossy and just kind of, about kind of themselves, and then to collect green or having plants around them. In fact, all the fountains, I think, should have growth around them. And then these were designed originally as fountains, and I finally made a fountain, but I thought that they would look better translucent. Now this is, I call these the Graces. And I did them in the gray, and I did them in the translucent kind of clear, which depending on the light, because you have the different refractive things with the light, they are pink or purple and one lady that owns a Sargent's in Long Island decided to commission me to do, she saw the darker ones and wanted one for herself. So it was a beautiful, in the environment of plants, it worked out very nicely. And then I have a pink one that was shown on the roof. It should be, and I call these the Pink Lady. This is one of the Pink Ladies, and the two are going to be shown at the Miami Fair, the other two Pink Ladies that have bronze on them. They're bronze and that pink. And there they are where I'm making them. The water would be at the level underneath the bronze that you see. And they're in the process. There's some bronze, say, right there on the edge to the right. There you see the bronze, how I'm collecting the water here and there. I was trying to work with the bronze and the pink, and the quality of pink going into like a green. Over to the right, you see the pink going out down into the green, and the light, the sunlight passing through, or the if they're lit at night, how the light passes through. This is finally what I wanted to do with them, is stack them. So I have a 25-foot bronze fountain, polished, highly polished with 6 coats of acrylic. So this is a fountain where the dish makes the water fall right down on top and all the way down, which is just how I imagined it should have been done 10 years ago. But I couldn't do it because my foundry didn't have the equipment until now to actually make a 25-foot fountain. I'd like to make a 50-foot fountain, because it just, it'd be so beautiful, just the endless column with water coming down. It's called Bounty. This is called Bounty. And I'm doing, so there you have it. You can see some of the water. This is before it's polished. I think, I decided to polish it because I liked it golden bronze. This is my most recent piece where I decided to kind of hark back to that idea of a kind of, you don't know quite what you're doing or seeing, and the phosphorescence. And I'm going to cast this into phosphorescent clouds, all the foam, and you have the mossy look. So I'm going to probably mix this with stainless steel. The supports are floating. There's a lot of illusion here. There's going to be a lot of illusion with stainless steel supports that sort of, shine in the night, but also the phosphorescence which floats. So I'm going to mix this. I'm working on it now. The molds have taken a full year. I did it this past December. And we're going to finish with the molds. And I'm now sampling the clouds. So this is called Hills and Clouds. I'm going to try to show, if I can finish this, by, I'm going to show at Storm King. A lot of my fountains have been asked to do that. They're very excited about making the presentation. So I hope to finish this one, floating it somehow. Doesn't have to be a fountain because I think it's going to have a lot of illusion anyway. But there it is. And I have a smaller piece over here on the wall, which is the same idea. And then I'm making all these paper pieces, which again have a kind of hollow quality. I'm working with them in the gold and the paint. And this is in East Hampton. In my studio there. And they're torsos, they're all kinds of things, and they're longer. And this is in what you see in this white wall. I built Adobe studios in New Mexico, out in the desert, and that's where I'm making my paper out there now, and making the taller, more manipulated pieces. Some are less painted than others, and I'm really having a good time with them. But they're like all those other pieces that I showed you in the sense that I have a form underneath and I put another form on top. Same with the clay, same with the every material, basically, it's working in pairs. So these are wax and caustic, like my wax paintings, with their detail. I mix this, some of it's egg tempera, some of it's, and this is all wax and caustic. These are all kinds of paints. I like to experiment with all kinds of paints. So I paint and sculpt. So that's it. So I'm so happy you have the latex painting here. Thank you, and thank you for today. Any questions?
We have time maybe just for a couple questions if there's some.
Yes, with regards to the mother and child fountain, what drew you in particular to the photo style?
Well, it's the excitement of the surface. I think we're all interested. We have very primitive kinds of attractions, but I like form. I like drawing. I like a very complicated form. I'm very attracted to, art in India. Even before I went to India, people said, "Oh, you should go to India. Your work reminds me of Indian art." Well, I studied the miniatures. You have a very nice collection here. I love Indian miniatures, but also I like metals. So in metals, you can get a very complicated effect, and you can get a drawing, a general drawing, but you can make the drawing very complicated. And it's interesting to me to kind of make something very simple, classical, but also very complicated. So I guess I like the contrapposto that you get in sculpture, and I like the kind of twisting, and the clouds in New Mexico are incredible, and when I look at the clouds, I just go wild. It's just, I mean, you know, I might have an accident one day because I'm always driving and just looking at the clouds. So I think nature is so rich that I think that's what draws me anywhere. I mean, the phenomena. I love architecture. I like building my own studios. I've built my own studios. And with Adobe brick, I'm trying to build another brick piece, but I'm trying to find a brick piece that's a sparkle brick that I found down in New Orleans. A company called Glacier Brick. Glacier, I think, did it, but nobody ever used it. In architecture, I want to use it in sculpture. I could use it in architecture, I figured, on the inside of a building, but I could also make a sculpture out of it if I could make some more of the brick. They could make some more. You know, in Mississippi, they have this very white, sparkly sand. And when I saw it, I got so excited, but nobody ever really built out of it. And I think you could do it if you had the right surfaces to coat it now, and we do. You know, I'm just interested in all kinds of beautiful materials to work with and to make forms. So that's one thing I'm trying to pursue there. I want to make a snake wall. You know, and if you go to Jefferson's house in Washington and Virginia, they have a marvelous snake wall, and I've always wanted to make a snake wall. I wanted to make one in Bombay, and I almost did. They were building a diamond bourse there, and I knew the architect that they had hired, and I wanted to do a large snake wall there. And I might have, had he gone on, he started it, but I don't think they ever finished the diamond bourse. But they're just things that you can do, I think, with brick and stone that, you know, if people had more thoughts about it, it would be interesting to do. But you have a beautiful stone work here. I mean, it's just great to go around here and look at the architecture. So I think it's a wonderful place you all live. So I appreciate it. But I like anything that's beautiful. And I love the museums here. It's just great. I was knocked out by some of the painting here. It was really great.
Well, thank you, Lynda.
Thank you.